The year is 1986, and the career of our film star was at an all-time low. After riding high in the 60s and 70s, our star's fame began to plummet after a string of box office bombs and critical failures. However, after being cast in the film adaptation of what was the best-selling novel of all time at the time, Sean Connery was sure that this was his way back into the industry's good graces. Instead, he became the butt of many a joke when this film failed critically and financially. Tonight, we discuss The Name of the Rose, the dark and dingy gothic mystery that has begged for a reevaluation for the last 40 years. And tonight, we are going to do just that. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. So everyone, Antonio, Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast, here with my co-host Justin Henson. Justin, we're talking about 1986's The Name of the Rose, or as I like to call it, Medieval 7, because when we think about it, this film sets a tone, it sets a precedent that people grew to respect when filmmakers like David Fincher, when filmmakers and screenwriters like Andrew Kevin Walker started writing these dark, atmospheric, gruesome, and grotesque mystery movies and not give any credit to the film that I think kind of paved the way in the mid-'80s for that type of genre, and that is this film. And this film has been the butt of many jokes. It has its own line of dialogue in Train Spotting, whereas Sick Boy essentially says that The Name of the Rose was just another mark of a downward spiral of Sean Connery's career. Yet, I love this movie, and we haven't talked about it at all since we brought it to the list, as we normally do. So now is my opportunity to ask you, what are your initial feelings of The Name of the Rose?
This one I was glad to see on the list because this was a first-time view for me, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
And
cool.
I saw it on the list when we were generating movies, and I went to this right when you put it on, and I watched it. And I've seen it probably about 4 times since then. This one is going to be one of those episodes, Antonio, where I think we're going to have a debate, a little disagreement here.
That's fine.
So, and this one, there is a lot to like. The first impressions of this, the movie's settings, the visuals are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the catch. That's what pulls you in. But as you know, with me, I'm a dialogue guy. I'm an adaptation guy. This one didn't really have anything to really pull me in when it comes to the second half. The first half of the movie, it has a lot of elements going for it. But as we add more and more to it, as we get to relying on the style, that's where the movie starts to fall apart. And we're going to get into a lot more detail on that. But my first reaction to this is that this was a missed opportunity. There's no question that Sean Connery did a great job with his individual performance. Christian Slater, individual performance. When it comes to his body language, I don't know if I can justify his performance when it comes to spoken words, because he doesn't really have a lot in this movie. But my main issue with this is with so many characters and the relationship between the Connery and Slater character, there's no chemistry there to really pull me in, to really care about what these two do. But my first reaction, the main disappointment I have is that main chemistry as we follow these two main characters through the investigation that I could care less about.
And see, we've had this conversation before, and I knew that you were going to feel this way about it because, you know, you are definitely a substance over style man. But for me, I will take style over substance when style is what the filmmaker is giving me, and it's what he's promising me. This, I think, is one of those situations where the adaptation crumbled under the weight of its own source material. That book by Umberto Eco was like the number one best-selling novel for like 3 years straight. And the fact that Jean-Jacques Annaud got the rights to it and was going to adapt it, everyone was really excited. We got this really great avant-garde filmmaker, but the style was definitely going to be something that he was going to put his hat on, while there were going to be a lot of plot points and a lot of story that was going to have to be left out in order to make that vision happen. The book is very wordy. The book is very dialogue heavy. And I think we've seen film adaptations that crumble under the weight of a dialogue and character heavy book and then translated into a very stylish film, to the point where you almost have to say that the film, it really is nothing like the book and shouldn't even be compared. People say that about Jurassic Park. People say that about a lot of Michael Crichton's books. So when I look at this film, I don't look at it as an adaptation of the novel. I look at it as an exercise of style, of character, and of tapestry. This is something that's supposed to look great, not necessarily feel great. And that's where I give it a pass, because I don't have expectations of it to blow me away with dialogue and character. Why would you, when you have all of these Franciscan monks that speak different languages, that come from different countries, from different sources, and they all have different motivations? It's almost like Alien 3, where you don't really care about the characters when they die. They are just there to die. It's the atmosphere that really brings it to you. So that's another one I'll compare it to, is Alien 3. Fincher again. Fincher must have loved this movie, because I see echoes of so much of his work and style in not only this film by Jean-Jacques Annaud, but some of his other films as well. So I always go back to the DNA and the seedlings of things that we love now. I look at this as an example of that.
Yeah, and I can see that. And when we look at the director here, I mean, there's no doubt that his forte is going to be style. I mean, he has an eye for the shot. He has an eye for setting the scene. We've seen it in, as I hate to go directly to these examples, but you look at it with Two Brothers, The Bear. I mean, this is where we kind of see his forte shine in these kind of silent movies. And this movie, I think, before Two Brothers came out, and again, I hate using that example, but when we go back and we see this setting, this could also be his flaw, is that we rely so much on the scenic shots that we miss a lot of the details. So when we have, and I don't think there's going to be any debate that the movie, the settings, the visual style, it looks fantastic. There's not going to be any debate for me on that. But the technical aspects of it, when it comes to the lighting, the focus on the details of when the lighting is consistent with the darker murkiness, because we have scenes that we kind of miss. We see the first scene of Sean Connery looking through the window, traveling to the monastery, and it's murky, it's dark, and then he looks out the window and it's bright and sunny. So there's a lot of pieces to this for a director that is so spectacle based or visionary.
Yeah, I would say visually driven.
Yeah, visually driven. There's a lot of misses on the technical aspects of this that really make me question if we're just relying on this setting versus having, like you said, some substance to it. Because I can ignore the substance piece of it if you're going for a visual spectacle of an adaptation. Because the adaptation, I didn't read the book. This is one of those I didn't, so I can't compare it. But this is one of those that I wouldn't even thought was an adaptation, because the dialogue is so limited and so brief and so simplistic that I wouldn't have even considered this an adaptation. So we would have to rely on that. We would have to rely on the visual spectacle. But we take movies that usually use this setting and we add more to it. We don't rely on this setting just to drive the movie, because the movie continuously looks dark and murky. And it's almost like a blank canvas that we can have with this setting, that we can add some special lighting to focus on our main characters, to add to that danger element. We can add some musical sound to it that I'll get into in a little bit, because that was my biggest pet peeve with it. But there are different aspects to this that I think is a missed opportunity, because we can add to this. We don't rely on this visual style, because you can have a great setting and the director can have the money shot of all scenes consistently over and over and over again. But it's visually tiring by the time we get into the second half, that we've seen it before. The first couple of acts, I'm bought in. I love this style, but going into the third act climax, I've seen it. Show me something different.
Yeah, so I mean, the same thing could have been said about Da Vinci Code, right? Da Vinci Code was this novel that was just like the biggest thing ever. So the adaptation had a lot to live to. It had a lot of expectations for it. And if you ask most people, it was fine, but it did not blow people's minds the way the book did. Now, this book was actually told first person through Adso, Christian Slater's character. And they kind of hinted that in the film. Like, the older version of him is narrating his recollection of this event and these murders and these investigations. So, to try and tell a story through the words of Christian Slater doesn't necessarily work. It'd be like if we had to listen to Keanu Reeves narrate everything happening in Bram Stoker's Dracula. No, thank you. I honestly think that Slater does a little bit better in this one because he doesn't have a lot to say. It's all based off of this mentor and mentee relationship where Slater's character is not supposed to really talk. He's supposed to ask questions, but mostly listen and learn. Therefore, all of the plot has to be driven through Sean Connery's character, William of Baskerville. But that's the thing that makes this a little bit tricky, and this is where I agree with you. You can't put it all on Sean Connery's shoulders, right? You can't put all the weight of that movie on his character alone when you have all these other characters that speak different languages, that have different motivations. If the story is supposed to be told through Adzo's, point of view, yet all of the plot progression relies on Sean Connery's detective discoveries, that is where it does fall apart when it comes to story structure and progression, and I'm going to say pacing, right? That is where I am a sucker for atmosphere, because if you make me feel the weight and the heaviness and the anxiety that a place like that will create in a human, they, in my opinion, do a very good job at creating the sense of blandness because they're monks. Humor is not allowed. Color is not allowed. Flavor of food is not allowed. The whole point of this is everything has to be drab and boring and unexciting because they're devoting their lives to God. And anything that would remotely enhance pleasure of anything is a sin. And that's the whole point of the story. So that's where I think it's a brilliant piece of work and direction, because the things that the monks are not allowed to be enjoying and doing, including knowledge, we as the audience have to suffer through that as well. It makes us part of the immersive experience. So while I agree with you that there are a lot of pacing issues and structure issues, especially in that third act, where we have to have the Oscar winner, right? We have to have F. Murray Abraham come in as the Grand Inquisitor. Yes, that does throw a wrench in the gears of this movie, but for me, it's the experience. It's the atmosphere it creates. And I can say that for many different things. So maybe I'm just an easier sell on stuff like this. But also, I'm kind of punk rock in the sense that, like, so many people hate this movie, it just makes me kind of want to like it more. That is not the objective view of a person that should be critiquing movies, which is why I don't. I appreciate them, and I appreciate the fuck out of it.
I love that. So, and this is where I see where you're going with it, and I love the aspect. I love the honesty to it. And I guess with me, I stopped looking at the adaptation after the second act. I stopped looking at the dialogue probably after my third viewing, and I focused more on the visionary aspect of it. And the one thing that really kind of just drove me nuts is I didn't hate this movie. I thought it kind of, to your point, was a little blandness to me where it's not going to stay with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is because of what I spoke to earlier was the blank canvas, because we have the lighting that, again, is a missed opportunity.
Right.
But the biggest thing that I think really just put the nail in the coffin for me is we get to the point, I think it's in the third act, where we have Sean Connery trying to gain access to the library. And it's the first time we see his lines delivered with passion and intensity. And we have this burst of music for the first time that it's almost like the filmmakers say, looks like Connery's awake. Let's just support that with some music and let's get this thing going. It's like the only time, it's like to wake up the audience. And this is a score by the amazing James Horner,
Mhm.
who this isn't his first rodeo. I mean, he did The Wrath of Khan, he did Aliens. He was huge in the 80s and even up until now with
Yeah.
Avatar. So this is the music aspect of it. This is the easiest payday for Horner, where he just had to worry about maybe 4 30-second musical scores in this movie. And this would have really helped move that emotion along for these characters. This would have really helped with the chemistry. Now, when we go to the blandness that you spoke to, I can see that because that makes sense to me. But when we have the intimacy of Connery and the Slater character, where we needed a little bit more, we needed like some stakes to it. These two don't even make eye contact when they deliver their lines most of the movie. We needed something from them on it. And this is where I think the director would have made it clear that we needed this is where music is important to really support that. If you're not going to direct these characters into having a likable chemistry or even something that you can buy into, have something in the background to really help drive that emotional element to it, to really engage the viewer. Because you have a talented film composer on your pay list here. You should have something that he can be utilized in where it makes sense that he's in the credits. So other than that, if you just have bursts of music, it's going to come across almost like a soap opera. And that's where we get kind of the pacing confusion from the first and second half, because all that happens and we see Horner with his musical score usually just in the second half of this movie.
Okay. Yeah, I get what you're saying with that. I like it. Um, my response to the chemistry and the connection between Christian Slater and Sean Connery is that to be one of these guys, you really are letting go any kind of human attachment. And at first, I wasn't sure. I mean, I saw this movie when I was a kid, and so I just kind of liked the atmosphere of it. And then I read the book, and then I've seen the movie just so many times. I've had it on disc for years. And the one thing that I think I get now is that Connery doesn't want to be a mentor. It's not a situation that he feels is gratifying to him. He is a scholar. He is invested in his quest for knowledge, which is why he's so obsessed with the idea of the library and the books. He doesn't want to really connect with Slater in any way that is going to make him feel emotional when that time of that connection is over. He is really just kind of like a dog walker, in my opinion. This guy is there to shut up, just listen and learn. And if I have anything to teach you or tell you, which we'll get to in a second, I will. But I think it's very cleverly described in his character and the way in his performance and the way he's directed that he does wake up when there is the prospect of a hidden library, when there is a prospect of forbidden knowledge, and that people are dying because they are looking out for this forbidden knowledge. I see that character. I see that drive in him where most people call it a bland performance. So that's how I interpret it. And again, everyone interprets it differently. But when you're craving more chemistry and connection between these characters, what I see is a monastery full of self-absorbed and inner reflective characters that are all unique in their own way. And that's what makes the movie fascinating. These are grotesque, disgusting, but fascinating characters. They all have their own little quirks. We got William Hickey in there, right? Who he is from a different monastery. He knows William of Baskerville, but he's got his own thing going on. You've got the blind library keeper. You've got Hugo Drax from Moonraker as like the main abbot of this monastery who's protecting his secret. Every character in this movie has a secret. And even though we don't get a lot of time or knowledge about their history, I'm fascinated by what their secret is and what it was the original cause of, let's say, their disformation, of whatever penance they're paying. For example, we got monks that have to like flagellate themselves because they have lust for other monks. This is the kind of movie that you can't just scroll through your phone and look up and okay, what's going on? There are so many character details in this movie that if you don't pay attention, it's very easy for you to not care about these people because they only give you minute drops of character reference, but they're there. I'm going to have to quote Ron Perlman before I let you speak. He says that this is one of his favorite films that he's ever made, and he wouldn't change a thing because he says, a great eye recognizes how great The Name of the Rose is, and there aren't that many great films around. It takes a very sophisticated kind of moviegoer to appreciate this film. So I'm going to take that as a compliment because I appreciate what the sophistication, at least in my interpretation, is. But that goes to show, man, not all movies are for everybody. I'm not going to fight for the death like I did with Seems Like Old Times on this one. This really is the kind of movie that if you recognize the thing that catches you, you're in. And if you don't appreciate what it's giving you, then you're out. And that's fine. It's not for everybody.
And I guess I should have taken Ron Perlman's advice and put on my glasses if I don't have a good eye to like this movie. Because Ron Perlman, I will give you 100%. 110%. He is fantastic in this movie. He was one of the oddball characters that really, you can tell, had a passion for the role, right? Mm-hmm. But everybody else, this was like Disney After Dark when it comes to their characters. This was...
I like it. I like it.
I was waiting for just one character that was normal, one that I wouldn't point a finger and say, that's the killer. Because all of these have to have some sort of physical defect. They have to be kind of a little goofy. They have to make you uncomfortable. And I get that the environment, the visuals, everything needs to look uncomfortable. But there's, at a point in this movie, it's too much where anybody can be the killer, but we're basing it off of special effects, makeup, the way somebody looks, not their actions. A mystery should have us follow the investigation based on clues, actions, and not look at a character's eyeballs, not look at their one tooth, not look at their big crooked nose and say, this must be him, because there's not enough to support these characters, these grotesque characters, to pinpoint that this could be the killer or that could be the killer. We needed something more other than physical looks to really justify what we're actually watching. And by the time we get to the end of the third act, it's exhausting with how many characters it bounces around from. And to the point where it's almost like students walking into an auditorium towards the end and asking who stole the principal's lunch, come forward. It's almost ridiculous to the point of, I don't know what was going on, that I don't know what the intent was. It doesn't make it clear. So the messaging of it is lost in translation by the time we get to the last 30 minutes of it. Mm-hmm. And when we get to the climax, it almost feels a little rushed, where it doesn't feel satisfactory on what happens. I didn't really care, but I think this, going in the second half, it was just bloated with so much other than Connery, other than Slater, and the investigation went to a bare minimum, and the movie focused too much on all these other supporting characters that really had nothing to say.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you think that the film is kind of like an exercise in futility, that there really isn't a real response or answer to the mystery of the movie. And this is where I agree with you, but in a different way. The mystery of the movie is a MacGuffin. I think that the whole plot of this being a mystery, of being a detective story, is a MacGuffin just to bring in these characters who are devoted to God, supposedly, but it's all futile. Because all of these brethren are keeping their own secrets, and the people who are in control of the knowledge are not the people who are in control of the monastery. The people with the knowledge are the ones that are in control of the knowledge, and everything else is just a facade. And that is enhanced when Gui shows up. Bernardo Gui, played by F. Murray Abraham, as the Grand Inquisitor. And it just goes to show how futile the whole idea of trial and witchcraft and Satanism is. It's all a show. The religious message of this movie is that it's all bullshit. And I think at the end of the movie, where we see that kind of last little bit of futility from William of Baskerville, he's, made it out of the library with a handful of books that didn't get burned, and then they're just like kind of off on the road together. It shows that he knew it was bullshit all along. Like, he's a man of discipline, but it's self-discipline. It's not necessarily enhanced by his religion. When do we see him pray? When do we see him actually take a moment and recognize God the way that everyone else does? He's a man of logic, and he's a man of like simple pleasures that are all based off of the pursuit of knowledge. He cares more about saving those books than he does himself, and even Adso in certain points. That to me is like the big flipperoo of what this movie does, is that it tricks you into thinking that it's a mystery movie. It wants you to think it's a mystery movie. And then when you get pissed off that it failed as a mystery movie, well, guess what? They win because it was not a mystery movie to begin with. It was a character study of religious futility.
I love everything that you said, and I wish I could just buy into that, and I wish I could watch it again.
Drink
and say,
the Kool-Aid.
absolutely.
It tastes better over here.
Because that's the movie I wanted.
Right.
But it just really didn't come together. And when we go from clue to clue, it was so underwhelming. It was just like they stumbled across a lot of this stuff, and we didn't get any information of the who, what, why. We don't even get a lot of the main focal points of the why and what this does for the next piece of the investigation.
Yeah.
Because that is, two things. So if it's trying to be a mystery, it does falter on that, because it is not, because it doesn't have the pieces to it. If it's the movie that you're talking about, that's the movie I would have loved to see, because this doesn't work as a mystery. The movie that you just went over, I wish they would have gone back and really focused on that, because the beginning had potential. The ending had a lot of potential, but they're two separate movies that I wish they would have expanded those ideas on, because there is something great here. But between the direction, the writing, which is the main issue here, it's confused writing, it's not focused, and again, it's a lot of those. It's not a horrible movie. It's a disappointing movie for me, because I can see what this movie could have been if we take out the book that, again, I haven't read. But just looking singly at the movie itself, there is a lot here that could have made this phenomenal. You got young Christian Slater, who wasn't huge at this time, but you do have Sean Connery, and you have this powerhouse of great performances, but they are underutilized, just like a lot of the other technical aspects and talents behind the camera and behind the screen.
So I think I'm going to help you out here and agree with you in a lot of ways. So I think the thing that majorly hurts this movie is the performance grandstanding that we get from certain characters, right? I think F. Murray Abraham is distracting in this movie, and I love F. Murray Abraham. But the more I think about it, he comes right off of an Oscar win, right, for Salieri and Amadeus. And he's up against Sean Connery. There is just something about his performance that feels just too heavy. He's working too hard. I feel like he's trying to upstage Connery. And in a sense, that's what the character is. They're bitter rivals, right? But there is something where I feel that in his performance, he is going, I'm not going to say off book, but he's going off concept, because he stops being menacing in the way that I think a Grand Inquisitor would be menacing, and he starts chewing scenery. And there isn't a lot of scenery chewing in the movie up until the end. It really causes a distraction for me, because up to this point, all these just really interesting looking characters and all these different monks, and especially Hickey brings like this kind of like warmth to this really cold environment. Everyone's very well playing within the same energy. And then F. Murray Abraham comes in and just totally like kicks the door down. So I think it does cause a disruption, which I think everyone complains about the ending of this movie. The third act is having issues. I think that's issue number one. Issue number two is I don't think enough people understood the material that were actually making the movie, right? I honestly think that James Horner didn't know what they really wanted out of him. I think that Jean-Jacques Annaud was playing more with visuals and with characters and less with the actual story, because Umberto Eco, the author himself, was like, what the hell did you do with my story? Like, it's only bits and pieces are there. So I get that part too. I agree with you in so many ways of what's wrong with this movie. But we've had these conversations before where it's like, okay, I didn't like the movie as much as you, but I respect the effort and I respect what they did with it. It's almost as if this movie was silent and it was maybe played with subtitles or through scratches on a piece of paper, I don't know. I really think that the dialogue does hurt the movie, but the atmosphere and the performances that are played in silence. I mean, there's some of those roles of these monks that you just see the menacing looks as they scurry across the monastery. That's the drama I like. I don't need the exposition that seems a little heavy-handed. So I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah, and we take Abraham at the end of the movie too. I mean, I agree. It's unnecessary because it has this big dramatic ending where you see the cart rolling downhill, and he doesn't have enough screen time to really care, and he doesn't really contribute enough to really care. So that could have gone out, and we could have spent a lot of time on the fire, saving the books or what have you. There's a lot that could have been scrapped from this movie, but that's the woulda, coulda, shoulda when it comes down to it. But I think, again, Connery is a Connery performance here. And again, I think to me, his performance is okay. It's cardboard, but again, he has nothing really to work with the dialogue. Mm-hmm. It is a writing problem here, just boiling it down to simplicity. And I think it almost feels like the script was being written as the movie was being shot. It feels like they didn't really have a clarity to it that we see so many times in adaptions. And it's a lot of improvisions, it seems like, to an extent, where it's the morning of this scene we're shooting. We're going to just scribble in a couple of lines, and then we'll just base it on silence and visuals to guide us to the next scene. So that was the biggest piece that I think was the misfire for me, at least.
Okay, cool. All right, now that we've gotten our feelings out in the open, let's hear what our critics had to say about this particular movie.
The Name of the Rose, and it's based on the best-selling novel about a series of strange events in a 14th century monastery in Italy. Sean Connery plays an interesting man named William of Baskerville, a monk who arrives at the monastery just as the first of a series of mysterious murders is taking place. There's another puzzling thing about this monastery, as Connery explains to his young novice in this scene. All those scholarly monks, but where are their books? So he and his companion begin an investigation, stumbling across a murder clue that will lead them to a hidden library.
So all they're doing right now is setting it up. And this is where, I put my little tinfoil hat on, like I always do. I already told you what I feel the movie's about. And the book kind of echoes that, but it leaves it really up to interpretation of the reader, right? These guys are looking for a mystery. Like, that is the way they're setting it up. And granted, the film presents itself as a mystery, and we already agreed that as a mystery, it's rather weak. It's got a great setup for a mystery, but it doesn't really follow through. And, my opinion is that's the point. It's a lesson in futility. But when it comes to how they agree in many ways the same way you agree with it, it gets a little bit more interesting.
Probably recognize F. Murray Abraham there from Amadeus. He won the Academy Award last year. Now he's playing the Grand Inquisitor. The Name of the Rose is an awesome achievement just in the way the film looks. The old monastery on the mountaintop, all filled with gloomy cells and cellars and labyrinths, is one of the most interesting sets I've seen in a movie in a long time. And there are some good performances in the movie, especially Connery's, as a monk who was just the first stirrings of modern thought in his medieval mind. But the movie itself is a disappointment. All murder mysteries should have plots that are crystal clear so that we can follow the investigation along with the investigators. This one is so confused, Connery doesn't solve the murders, he simply stumbles over the solution. We keep waiting for everything to be explained, but the movie's ending is so confused that I didn't even understand why Connery was still alive.
Okay, So he's speaking your language, right?
Yeah, and with me, when it comes to first time views, I stay away from reviews. I'll read the synopsis, but I want to know as little as possible with the movie. And a lot of the things Ebert's speaking to, I don't agree with the Connery. I don't think there's enough there to justify a great performance.
Yeah,
think
I would
it's
not call it a
okay.
great performance. I would call it a Sean Connery performance.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that challenges his range in this movie. So, I mean, that's one thing I'll disagree with. But when it comes, I think we both agree the visionary style, even though to an extent I think it got tiresome, I think is there. So a lot of the bullet points that he's talking to when it comes to building a mystery, we've agreed as well that is weak. So he nails a lot of great points here. But at the same time, like you said, everybody's going into this, or critics are going into this, viewers, it's marketed as a mystery. So unless you have multiple views and you're there to really kind of do what you're doing,
Right.
which is break it down and get an interpretation of it, first time people walking into a theater aren't going to get that. There is no way you can pinpoint that with just one single view. So when Ebert's breaking it down, absolutely the points that he's making are extremely valid.
So this is where, again, like I think that, and I agree with you 100%, that this movie is not meant for the first time viewer, right? The first time casual. Here's my $15. I'm going to watch this movie and I'm going to get everything I want out of it. So this is where I get confused sometimes, because this movie is just historically panned. You know, it's had a huge reevaluation. A lot more people are speaking well of this than they did at the time. When I first saw Everything Everywhere All at Once in the theater, it baffled me how many people thought it was amazing. I thought it was an excellent feat in filmmaking and editing and trying to, cross the streams in terms of stories and timelines and stuff like that. But at the end of the movie, my first time out, I didn't get anything out of it. And it's not that it confused me. I got what it was trying to do. It just exhausted me. So it won a Best Picture Academy Award. And I was like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing. You know me, I really don't care about awards. I think they're kind of masturbatory. But that's kind of like my point, is that this movie is looked at as a mystery right from the start. And when it doesn't deliver, it gets kind of shit on for not delivering. Where when I first saw the trailers for Everything Everywhere All at Once, I really wasn't expecting as much of a metaphysical message as much as I was expecting an action flick or a kung fu flick, but with a little bit of like a modern twist. Things like Scott Pilgrim and films like that do, where I'm going to give you a story, I'm going to put a lot of action in it and some special effects, and I'm going to whiz bang and you're going to love it. It's when it went deeper than that where I started to get a little bit put off by it. And I'm still a little put off by it. I don't think it's a terrible movie. I think it's an excellent example of filmmaking. Like I said, it's artistry. But I can only imagine them feeling the same way about this as the way I felt about that movie when I saw it. So I can't hate them too much for, yucking my yum, because I'm yucking other people's yum with Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's the only way I was able to kind of like make that cross comparison of what people feel about this movie versus how I feel about a movie that people love and I don't.
Yeah, and I feel like we're going to get a lot of backlash by bashing Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I'm not bashing it. I'm just saying I'm not there with it yet.
Yeah, and I was in the same boat. It wasn't my favorite of that year. I mean, The Banshees of Inisherin was my pick. But yeah, I mean, it was an achievement. There's a lot of great elements to it. And again, we tend to forget the aspect where they're on air, they're writing their reviews, they have to meet deadlines, and they're writing on behalf of a first-time view if it's worth the, like you said, the $15 for entry. So, and again, back then when you're spending $5, $10, $15, $20, $30, people aren't going to do that to kind of get the gist of what the filmmakers are trying to portray, unless they have a justifiable catch or an engagement from the viewer to really pull us back in. And I think that was a missing element, was it doesn't really have a hook to catch us and pull us back in. When it comes to Everything Everywhere All at Once, there is a hook and entertainment value there to really warrant some multiple rewatches. Here, we don't get that. And especially back then when it's competing with movies of 86. A lot of these movies that are coming out. And we just had this conversation of the time era. I mean, this is still around that time where I don't think we had a lot of interest in that era. And the box office here shows that when it comes to this movie. So you have to be careful with one, adaptions, and two, the way we present the era. So this is why the marketing team really presented this as a mystery. And this is what all the critics are basing it off of. So if you're going to market that in 86 next to all these other movies, you have to have a solid structure of dialogue. And this, I think, with Ebert is really portraying that this isn't going to be almost a good time at the theater if you're expecting a mystery.
Well, if you're an American, it only made $7 million in the States. It made over 70 in Europe. So again, that's one of those things where maybe it was just the wrong audience. Maybe the avant-garde European audience understood what it was trying to do. I'm not trying to say that Americans are dumb. This is definitely something that was, like you said, like we talked about this in The Bride. Who wanted a gothic horror film in 1985? Apparently nobody. Who wanted a gothic Franciscan monk monastery mystery in 1986? Apparently nobody. One of the things, though, that I did notice this is we talked about this in Gorillas in the Mist, too. It almost feels like they were anticipating this to be good. And I think that kind of goes into why their critique goes in a certain direction, which we will play now.
I had similar problems with the film, and I felt badly about that because, and I wouldn't dare give away the ending and what's up in the library and all that. Yeah. It is so wonderful what they're chasing. His mission, his quest, even that he doesn't know it, is so important and so beautiful that everything that precedes it, I said, oh, come on, let me get into the editing room, take out all these wild characters that are flying around. You almost don't even need the Inquisitor. Just have him work in the monastery and get up into that library, tighten this film up, and you would have a terrific film.
The movie would have benefited from a great deal more simplicity. There are too many people on the screen. They are weird oddballs. They dress and look and behave and speak weirdly. We can hardly see them in the shadows of the photography. They're walking in and out of all those mazes in such a way that eventually the film is just exhausting to look at. A pure line from beginning to end. Connery arrives. There is a mystery. The further he traces it, the more fascinating it becomes. Would have been the way
too much
to
on
make the movie more
too much on the murders and not enough on the holiness of his quest.
I gotta say, man, he is so close to hitting my point that it's upsetting. He is so close to walking face first into what I've been trying to say, and that is the beauty of what Baskerville is after, in my opinion, is the whole idea that it's a futile mission. It's got nothing to do with the murders. It's got nothing to do with the mystery. It's about the protection of knowledge, and the knowledge reveals that the religious aspects that all these people are just killing themselves over is bullshit. He is so close to it, but at the end of the day, he can't let go of the fact that he wants it to be a mystery movie. That is why when they say, hey, I want to get into the editing room and I want to take out all these oddball characters and I just want to focus on Connery's mission. Okay, that makes that story simple. But that's not the story that we as in my team, wants. We want the story of why these people are there and why people are dying to protect this secret. And the secret is that all these ancient texts that they worship and follow have subtexts that essentially prove that what they're doing is nonsense. That if God says that humor and love and sex and all these things are sins, then why are the grand masters that they've been following writing about them? That's what's in the library. That's what's hidden. That's not the mystery. It's not why people are dying. It's not what Baskerville's there for. It is the message that everything that they're doing is futile. He's so close to it, but he's passionate about it. He wants to like this movie. He's trying to make the movie work in his head, and we don't see Gene do that often. He usually is just like, this movie sucks. These people are garbage. This movie is mean. How could they kill that guy off so early? Blah, blah, blah. He's trying to make this movie work, so you know that he liked it enough to want to make it work in his little movie theater in his head.
Yeah, and here's the deal. And I'll go on defense with a lot of the stuff that you said in the previous conversation, because this is, I think, pivotal when it comes to what we expect. And we've talked about this before, where
Right.
we're presented with an idea of a movie. We go in, we have set expectations, and then we're disappointed. And that's where we get a lot of this passion from Gene that's being kind of spoken on screen. And even with my experience, I didn't research reviews. I stayed away from a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
And reading the synopsis, I'm like, this is going to be great. A murder mystery, Sean Connery. How can this go wrong? Halfway through, I'm like, what is going on? So I can kind of relate to what Gene and to a point Roger is saying is the way this movie is marketed is being shown to the critics, and they're going to have a certain expectation of what's going to be delivered to them. And if they don't get it, this is what they have to reiterate on screen of a movie that they wanted to have, the movie that they were promised to have. And when they don't get it, how can you possibly write a review to the public saying this movie is exactly what you think you're going to get?
Let me read you part of his written review because, again, sometimes Roger is a lot deeper and more aware of what his thoughts are on paper than on the show. So he writes, as intelligent as a reductio of Umberto Eco's Sly Farrago, he's using his words, of a whodunit and medieval metaphysics as one could have wished for, the film simply looks good. It really succeeds in communicating the sense and spirit of a time when the world was quite literally read like a book. So the way I'm reading this is, again, he's almost walking face first into the point of what I think the movie's trying to present. You're saying it's a mystery, but then you're talking about the world that it's set in and the world these guys live in. That's the point. That is the point. You put it in your review. So I'm going in circles. All I can say is that I understand 100% why someone wouldn't find this movie entertaining. I don't think it's supposed to be entertaining. I think it's supposed to be atmospheric and it's supposed to make you feel a certain way when you're done with it. Kind of the way that like some of these horror movies or some of like the cannibal movies in the 1970s make you feel. You're not going to walk out of the theater and be like, oh, I had a great time at Name of the Rose. It wants you to go like, oh, God, what is humanity all about? And what the hell is up with religion and these monks? Like, it's supposed to make you really just not feel like you experienced a film. It wants to make you feel like you've experienced a lesson in futility.
And that's where I think it's a missing element. Honestly, I didn't feel anything after watching this movie. And to the point where I think, again, we not to go in circles, but to reiterate a lot of the points that we have, that just doesn't make me give a reason to care or ask those questions. Because again, when we watch a movie that's marketed towards a mystery piece of it, you almost have a directional mindset of what your standards are and what you want to see. And I'm not looking for anything else. And to the point, I think my viewing last night, I really tried to pinpoint a lot of these elements that just really spoke more to what the film was presenting me.
Mm-hmm.
And it boils down to just pure execution by the filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
And was this movie properly communicated? Was it properly executed? Was it properly written? At the end of the day, the director has a responsibility to making sure that his message is being told. Was the director's message being told? The answer, to me at least, open for interpretation. But to me, it wasn't, because at the end, I should have some questions. I should have a feeling of something that I take away from it. And that's, again, we rely on the visuals, rely on these characters that Roger points out. And I kind of agree with both of them to an extent that I didn't really feel anything coming from it. And I got to tell you, after the fourth viewing of seeing these visuals over and over again, and just really paying attention to everything else, it was exhausting to me. And I ended up hating these characters more and more after the fourth viewing, especially our disfigured characters. I got sick of watching them. But I will disagree with Roger on one aspect. I think when these characters are off camera, they're in the shadows, I think those weren't distracting to me. I think they were actually pretty well done for the fact that they added that mystery element to it that reminded me of old mysteries from the 40s and 50s, where the shadows are there just overshadowing half a face. I think the photography on that was actually pretty well done.
Mhm.
So I think I disagree on that aspect, because those add that different element of style that I complained about earlier, that these characters, if there's anything that comes out of these characters, it's those elements that show that they're actually trying to utilize a different style of lighting, that they're really trying to amplify these characters to feel something.
Yeah. And I like that, because the way I see it is that this isn't a monastery as much as it is a prison that these people have self they've put themselves in there on their own, and they're staying there because they don't belong in the outside world, or maybe they've done something in the outside world that would offend God or offend society. So when you think of it that way, in my opinion, and don't think of this as a place of religious worship, think of this as a place where we're going to put the bad people away, but we're going to do it in the name of God, and they're going to self-govern themselves, much like Alien 3. I'm going to make Alien 3 connections all day. That's just really what does it for me. So when we talk about the scores of how we want to give our critics credit, I think it might surprise you. I'm going to give Gene a B+ on this, because I really, as much as I disagree with how he likes the film and how I like the film, I'm going to put that personal preference aside and think about, what is he doing here when it comes to the passion of this story? He wanted this movie to be better. He was very passionate about like what he would do. And I'm not saying that he's wrong. You know, maybe he could have made a better mystery movie. If that's the movie he wanted, go in the editing room, cut out all the guys that I love. You might make a better movie for yourself. He is not saying that this movie needs to be tossed away or thrown away or is completely disposable. There's enough of this movie that he wants to save it and make it better. I don't get a lot of passion from him in other critiques and other reviews. So based off of that, and not just going to his classic hate words and his classic spicy content, I like what he does here. So I'm going to give him a B+, because I think his heart is in the right place.
Oh, I think that's fair, because I think it is, and I think he really does try and really want to like this movie. And I do like that he, even though with a lot of disappointment, that he did have a lot of passion around wanting to like this movie. So, I mean, it was refreshing. When it comes to Ebert, a lot of the aspects, I think I disagreed with him on two aspects: the character shadows that I spoke to, and Sean Connery's performance. Everything else I agree with, and I think he makes some very valid points. When it comes to his written review, it seems a lot nicer than what's presented on screen. And we can tell in the written review that he really wanted to like this movie too. And he gives very specific examples of what kind of went wrong with this movie.
Mhm.
So to me, I think we're on a roll. I really enjoyed this review, and I think he makes some valid points. So I'm going to give him a 3-star.
Yeah, cool. I like it too. And it goes to show that just because they don't like the movie that I personally have a lot of passion for, I'm not judging them on whether or not they like it. I'm judging it on how they are expressing their ideas of the film and not just throwing it away. And there's plenty of times where they've thrown the film away and I'm like, yeah, 100%. Don't waste your words on it, because I didn't like it either. But one man's trash is another man's treasure. So, no, I'm glad that we had a very constructive debate about this that didn't resort to seems like old times. You're wrong, Justin. But I get it. I get why this movie's easy to not like. I understand it 100%. I know lots of people that can't stand Blade Runner, and it's my favorite movie of all time. They think it's slow and it's dry and it's boring. I think it's immersive. Maybe that's just my kind of movie, is I want to be immersed in an environment because Utah's boring and the Franciscan chapel and monastery where these guys are living is kind of exciting. And I just like the idea that I feel like I'm part of it. So maybe that's where I'm from.
Yeah, and I get it. And honestly, before the show, I had the movie playing in the background. I was doing push-ups. I was training to get ready for a real debate on this one, because I thought this one was really going to go off the rails. But honestly, I thought it was a great conversation. And I think the one thing I truly did love was the movie that I was picturing in my head, the movie that you described to me that I really wanted. And that really did encourage me to almost go back and read the book, which after watching this movie, I had no desire to.
Mhm.
But just your vision of it makes me curious on picking up the book.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I could be totally wrong, but it's just how it works in my mind.
You'll hear about it after I'm done.
So everyone, next week we got a really special treat for you. We're going in 1996. Justin has brought Stephen Hopkins' The Ghost in the Darkness. We're a little bit closer to our era, seeing these films in theaters now, not so much in the 80s and 70s like we have been. So I'm excited to talk about this one and excited to hear what our critics have to say about it. So it's streaming a few places. It's still kind of like a little hard to find on physical media. It hasn't had a really good solid release, but it's out there. Go find it because I think this will be a fun conversation, maybe the palate cleanser that we need after the last few films. And yeah, good choice.
Can't wait for that one. It's going to be a great conversation. And this one, the reviews are going to be an even better conversation.
Anyways, all right. So everyone, thank you for listening to us. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and our audio podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. Make sure you find all of my stuff at thecultworthy.com. Justin Henson can be found at
themoviewire.com.
Please like, review, rate, subscribe, share. Not only Back to the Balcony, but both of our respective shows. We appreciate it. And if there's any movies or reviews that you want to see on this list, either hit Justin up on the Movie Wire on his socials or me at The Cultworthy, and we'll see if we can get it on the list.